I got involved in this because somebody came to me, some people from the government came to me to ask for my help to look at medical harm that had come to some individuals around this matter. And they didn't come to me because I had any special experience in UAP or the phenomena. They were doing complete medical workups on this cohort of individuals, about 100 individuals from the military and the defense establishment and the IC and diplomatic corps. They'd asked around and they said, well, we want to do blood analysis for inflammatory events. Who's the best person we can talk to? And they said, well, you got to go talk to this guy Nolan at Stanford. He has the world's most advanced instrument for looking at blood and giving you a detailed report on these things. And that's when they showed up in my office and asked me for my help. And, frankly, at the beginning, I thought it was a joke. That somebody it was sort of a candid camera moment.
I was going to ask you, how did they present themselves to you? Was it the classic suit and tie? What did they say? Hello, sir, we're from the government.
Yes, and we're here to help you. Yeah, a la Ronald Reagan. No, they literally showed up unannounced and said, hi, we're here. I represent, and I work with the CIA, and the other was a aerospace organization executive. And these are the medical cases we'd like your help on. And it didn't become about UAP until about 30 minutes or so into the discussion. And that's when I began to look around to see if there was a candid camera somewhere pointed at me from one of the other windows in the building. But, it was, what got me intrigued was the data that they showed. I mean, they didn't just say, hey, these things happened. They took out MRIs and they showed me the specific scarring within the brain that had occurred. And then they gave me the detailed medical reports of some of these individuals. And so to the extent that what they were showing me was real, and it is real, or at least I thought it was real at the moment, I said, okay, well, this is interesting. How can I help? And then that's when it became a discussion, at least in part, about UAP. And I helped them. I went out and interviewed some of the individuals personally to make sure that, I sort of feel like you have to get involved individually about some of this. I flew out to speak with some of these individuals. And I was convinced that they had experienced something real. I wasn't in a position to validate what they saw, but their body language told me that they had experienced something. And so that was pretty much my inauguration and induction into the what is often called the invisible college of academics and scientists who are working behind the scenes on the matter to understand it in a more normalized way.
What year did the government first approach you?
It was around 2011, I think, 2011, 2012. I don't remember. It
seems like, and maybe I remember growing up hearing stories about Roswell, and the dish and all of these things. Paid almost no attention to it other than to say that I was aware of that term and it had something to do with, I don't think they were calling it UAPs at the time. I think the blanket term was just aliens.
UFO. Yeah,
UFO, aliens. It seems like in the past few years, these conversations, people are in a place where they're much more willing to have these conversations from a serious perspective. And I'm curious why you think that is. Is it just because of the volume of information is coming forward and it no longer can be held back? Do you think somebody behind the scenes is saying, you know what, perhaps it's time that we release this to the general population? What do you think it is that is setting the stage and environment where people are much more open to talk about these things?
Well, I think it's both of the things that you said. One, the volume of information that's coming out. That matches something where it's called the Kuhnian Revolution, Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn was a professor, I think, at Harvard, who wrote this thing about the structure of scientific revolutions, where, as in many areas, people ridicule things at the beginning. They don't believe it until the data begins to build to where you can no longer ignore it. and that the data basically says that the old model of science of how to view things doesn't operate anymore. And then suddenly everything changes and the new model becomes the case. Gandhi had a similar thing. First they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win, essentially. Change comes in that order. So I think the first thing is the amount of data is overwhelming at this point, that there's something worth understanding. Second, you've had people like Schumer, Senator Schumer, Senator Rounds, Rubio, Gillibrand, as the senators, and then a number of representatives who've seen some of the data behind the scenes literally write legislation. And Biden signed legislation in December of 2023, which talks about non-human intelligence. I mean, think about that for a moment. In the National Defense Appropriation Act in 2023 and in 2022, they established an office in the Department of Defense to study this stuff and to collect information from across all of the organizations within the government, which is huge. I mean, the government operations are huge in that regard. So ARROW, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, exists, 50 people, paid for by the taxpayer, now collecting this information. I could have a different set of words to talk about them. We can talk about them perhaps later in the show. This year, again, there's going to be another amendment put forward to redo what was wrong with the last one. So here you have now 3 years in a row, the National Defense Appropriation Act will have information regarding UAP. First, the government has admitted they exist. They haven't said what they are, and that's fine. That's science. You shouldn't say what they are until you know what it is, or at least you're willing to say. They've admitted it exists. They're putting monies towards understanding it. So here you have the government has agreed, society has agreed, a large portion of society agrees that there's something there. So what's the missing link at this point? The scientists, the academics. The academics now are, frankly, behind the 8 ball, behind the curve on this, because they haven't been allowed into the conversation because there's been this self-censoring of academics to think that if you're involved in something like this, you've gone over the deep end. And I've experienced that personally, at least, as of about, let's say, maybe 10 to 8 years ago, where people would say, oh, Garry, you're going to ruin your career for doing this, blah, blah. And I'm like, whatever, it doesn't, I mean, my career is perfectly well set. But to your point, the tables have turned. In that now I can go give a talk at Harvard or anywhere, and literally I will be introduced as the guy who talks about UAP and legitimizes it. I will be asked afterwards to take selfie with other scientists because their brothers, friends, sisters, children all know about me and they want to talk about it. I'll go out to dinner after having given a talk, and rather than talk about the science I presented for an hour, they want to talk about UAP. So, having a serious discussion and framing the conversation with boundary conditions about how you talk about it lets people in to talk about it in a safe space. I mean, I can believe whatever I want outside about what I think it is and what's going on, but that's anecdote and speculation, which is fine. I can have, and I've had my own personal experiences and having seen things, but that's not science. So you set and create a separate fenced off area where anybody can walk into it and talk about it safely and have a fun conversation about what the data might mean.